joined today by Lucy Bolan. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to be doing a slightly different sort of episode today. Rather than talking in depth about your career journey, we're going to be doing a bit of a kind of an insider insights episode, all about what's happening in the market at the moment, specifically for marketers. So yeah, really interested to get into some of those, shall we say, of what's happening out there at the moment. But before we do that, do you want to give us a bit of an intro, bit of a background into you, Lucy? Tell us about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So yeah, my name's Lucy. As you know, I am a specialist marketing recruiter. I've been recruiting now for, I think just almost coming up to, 20 years, I think.
Good on you.
I know, well, it's gone quick. 2 of those years in the UK and then the rest based here in Melbourne. Over my years, I've been recruiting roles from anything from, I don't know, marketing assistant, coordinator, right up to GM, CMO level, pretty much across, I'd say, most industries over that period. And yeah, at the beginning of this year, I also founded my own recruitment company called New Chapter Talent. So I think we're now in, thank you. So yeah, month 7, here we are. It's gone so quick.
Yeah, I think you're 1 month ahead of me. We're almost on the identical trajectory, which is cool.
Exactly right. I think we're in parallel there.
Yeah. How are you finding it? How is it? Is it what you expected it to be, kind of being out on your own, or is it things that have surprised you along the way?
Yeah, I think honestly, I'm loving it. I really am. I feel like, firstly, I'm in a luxurious position to actually do what I do. I think, you work really hard all throughout your career to finally get to this point, and then you get to the point and say, brilliant, it's time for me to put my own brand out, do my own thing. And the real work really kicks in.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it's a lot of hard work, definitely. I feel like I've never worked as hard as I am right now, but I'm loving the fact you can be so creative at the same time. And, I'm not having to, get approvals on, decisions. I can make those decisions myself, which is brilliant. And quite frankly, I get to do what I love, which is really simple recruitment. So, actually find people for the right role, and yeah, vice versa. And it's great.
Nice. I like that. I think it's funny, isn't it? I think there's so much kind of glamorization of working for yourself, and I think LinkedIn's probably a bit guilty of that, and there's lots of advantages. I agree with and echo with a lot of what you've just said there, but it's not without its downsides too, and it's quite hard.
It's very hard. It's very hard. I mean, I always, you see these people on LinkedIn and they've got the laptop and they're in the Maldives on the beach. Like, I want to do what they do. That's definitely not my life right now. Absolutely. Maybe one day that would be lovely, but definitely not at the moment.
Maybe that's it. Maybe it's a kind of a different stages. But yeah, certainly not in the first 6 months or first year. It doesn't seem particularly realistic.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's been a pretty interesting time, hasn't it, over the last kind of certainly few years, with the obvious COVID impact and all of that kind of stuff. But I thought it would be a really useful time to, as I said, do a bit of a kind of an insider insight into what's happening in the market and what you're seeing, what you're hearing from your clients, from your candidates, and just give people a bit of an insight into what's happening out there in the broader marketplace. I suspect I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there kind of an overarching answer to what's happening in the market at the moment, or is it quite nuanced in different areas?
Gosh, I think if I was to describe honestly what this market's doing currently at the moment, I'd say it's like a box of licorice all sorts. There's a lot going on. There is a lot happening currently. I mean, really, broadly speaking, we're quite frankly in an employer's market. That it's that simple. And obviously, I'm talking more about marketing specifically, but it's a complete employer's market. I think, compared to where we were, I think back in 2022, we all hit the boom time. And, I know recruiters particularly, we all made hay while the sun shone. It was a really interesting time where, having gone through COVID, we were in this market where really I found very much that it was actually the candidates that had more of the sort of sway back then. I know I remember having various conversations with candidates then who would have a list as long as their arm around, the days that they'll be in the office, the days that they won't be in the office. And, a lot were able to also, in some circumstances, negotiate part-time work and the salaries. I know people that were getting 30, 40K, increases and on some occasions, and businesses were paying it, they were. Whereas now that's completely flipped. So, I feel, and in a way, I'm not overly too surprised because, there was a lot of individuals back then that personally, I could see, that were probably getting a little overpaid, if I'm being completely honest. There were individuals that, don't get me wrong, based on your level of experience, if you're not getting what you should be, I'm completely going to bang that drum and fight for that person to be paid fairly. I think that's really important. But there were definitely a few that I'd kind of be like, your level of expectations there aren't quite right. Whereas, now, I mean, it's very different. We, as I said, are very much in that employer's market. And I find, we're now in a position where it's heavily competitive. There's been so many redundancies, restructures, there's lots of frustrations. And, I'd say very much at the senior end more so, it's tough. It's really tough. There's just not, I don't believe, enough roles for all these fantastic CMOs and talented GMs that, I know who are actively doing everything they can to secure the next role.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I think particularly at that senior end, because up until, what was it, the end of last year, sort of October, November, I was still recruiting at that point in
Yeah.
time. So I did see some of that from that kind of perspective of, it did seem to be a lot of those more senior roles that were affected by kind of downsizing, redundancy. And my expectation was that over time they'd come back.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's what's happened. Certainly at the point in time when I left recruitment, it hadn't happened yet. Sounds like that's still the case, that those roles haven't come back in the same number?
Yeah, I don't believe they've come back in the same number. But also I've found, interestingly, that when there are those roles being advertised, a lot of businesses have interestingly chosen, I'd find more so at that stage, to actually, manage it themselves through, whether it be LinkedIn or through, Seek. And it's interesting because I guess businesses at this point in the market, they know that, quite frankly, if they're going to put an ad out for CMO, they're probably in this market going to get easily over 300 applicants. It's that simple. And look, if they've got internal resources that can manage that kind of time frame and manage that workload, which, some businesses have obviously got, very talented talent acquisition teams that are there to handle that, then great. But, there's frustrations definitely from a candidate's perspective where, because there's almost this lack of indecisiveness around exactly what we not want, because we've got so much choice. We've got all these fabulous, individuals, these talented, awesome marketers that, instead of it being, say, initially perhaps a 3-stage interview, it's now turned into a 6 or a 7 because, we thought, we'd make a decision now, but now we want you to come back and do an interview. And there's frustrations and it's sort of this never ending, timeline that's, and I think when there's not a recruiter involved, a lot of my candidates, I'm speaking to them a lot, obviously, as you can imagine, day to day, on a daily basis, where they're pretty frustrated because it's like, well, we don't know when we're going to hear back. They put the CV, they apply for a role, it goes into what I call the abyss of, do I ever hear anything back?
I used to call it the void, same thing. Yeah.
The black hole of Seek or whatever it may be. I don't know. And look, in some cases, don't get me wrong, the processes are great and it all moves, it moves well. But when we're in a market where the volume is so big, certainly at the senior end, it's definitely frustrating. I feel at the moment for a lot of senior marketers in that space. I think it's tough.
It's a really interesting observation. I hadn't thought of it that way, actually, that it's the fact that there are so many applicants for those roles part of the thing that's slowing down the process, because it's that
Mm.
sort of, there's so much choice. Maybe we thought we knew what we wanted, but actually, oh, we hadn't considered this angle or that angle, or what about someone from this background, or, and it's actually the availability and the breadth of choice that's leading to some of that indecision, essentially, that people are experiencing.
100%. And it's really interesting because I had a conversation actually last week with a senior marketer who's he's a CMO. And he made a really, really valid point because, he was sort of saying, I feel like nowadays, because of the conditions that we're facing at the senior end, that many businesses are hiring safe. And so, they'll talk about, we want, someone to challenge the norm, and we want innovative
I know
thinking.
where this is going. Yeah.
And all this, we want someone to push the boundaries and all that kind of stuff. And that's great. But then we read the bottom of the advert and it says, minimum 5 years experience in the field of engineering or in the field of utilities. And it's a really difficult one because, there's so many talented, CMOs or GMs that potentially could do that role. And they're going to offer all of those, innovative, creative, fresh thinking, challenging the norm, but they don't have the industry experience. And, they're like, well, that just rules me out completely. But if you are hiring and you're that person who's put that that ad together, I think the answer is, if you can get a blend, if you can get a mix of, someone who, maybe 50% who've got the industry knowledge, and then maybe take a risk or, take a gamble on some awesome individuals that come and work for brands that, hire well, that are, credible, then 100% I'd be wanting to speak to those individuals, because I think, we talk about, culture, and you could have someone that's got like for like industry experience, but culturally they don't fit the bill from a team perspective. So I just think we sometimes need to think a little bit outside the box with this stuff.
I definitely agree. And the word that it always comes down to, you mentioned it there, is risk. And I find that really interesting, because I've heard that many times
Yeah.
myself, of someone saying, we want someone with the same industry experience because it's, risky and I find that so interesting that people frame it in that way. I have to say, I've never understood it. And it's something I think that is much more prevalent in the Australian market than it was kind of in the UK. And it is definitely this inherent kind of perceived
Yeah.
risk. But why would be hiring someone from a different industry be risky? I don't understand that. Someone coming from the same industry could be not very good. They, as you said, that they might be culturally a really, really poor fit for the organization. They might, I don't know, have terrible communication skills that they somehow manage to hide during an interview process. There is risk everywhere. And yet, to purely focus on industry as the only thing that will mitigate that risk, I've never really been able to understand that. It's never made sense to me.
Yeah. I think as well, a lot of the time, we know it comes from, I think, the hiring manager, that person who's making those decisions. And I've certainly found this myself when I've placed candidates that have come from, say, marketing agency and then into a client side role. And, I know that when I speak to individuals that perhaps are account directors, in agencies, they get to a point where they go, well, I don't want to be working, 10, 12-hour days. And I don't want to be out on a Thursday night till 2 o'clock in the morning celebrating a new win that, a bid we've won or whatever it may be. They want work-life balance, and it's time for them to transition client side. And a lot of them can find it quite difficult to make that leap. And I think for that reason, I've had successes where, hiring managers will say, well, actually, we can make that happen, because what, they've come from agency themselves and they value the type of person, the type of work that, individuals that have come from marketing agencies, are across, because they work ridiculously hard, they're resilient, and they tend to have so much, adaptability, creative thinking. I'm a real advocate for pushing those individuals to take roles client side if they can, or when they're ready to do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And that goes back to my point earlier about getting candidates that perhaps don't always fit that sort of, particular mold. I know back when I used to work for Bluefin Resources, I always used to talk about, we always used to say, if you can get 3 individuals in that shortlist that are perfect, and then have that 4th wild card option,
Yeah.
it just helps push, a bit more of that. Think about this person can do it. They've not come from that, but culturally they're going to be perfect and they're really going to fit the bill. And it's interesting, it's good to, I think, to offer a bit of a different perspective.
Absolutely. And I think for both sides, actually, for client and candidate, to me, that's always one of the benefits of working with an experienced specialist recruiter who really understands their market, because they will look at candidates with a slightly different lens, and they won't perhaps be so cookie cutter in terms of the experience that they're looking for, but they'll be able to say, okay, you've said these are the things that you need this candidate to do. I know that Lucy can do this because it's exactly what she's done in her other business. Might not be immediately obvious on paper, but these are the reasons why I think this person would be great. And the ability to have someone advocating for you essentially in that scenario. Whereas if you just, sent an application in cold, you may not get through because, as I say, it's not maybe immediately obvious on paper that you've got that experience. But yeah, I think it's really important just to, so you should maybe kind of push the boundaries a little bit and just kind of challenge some of that thinking along the way.
Absolutely. And I say a lot of the time to my clients, have a coffee, just grab a coffee with them. I put a post up recently on LinkedIn about how let's bring back the coffee meetings, for 3 years in COVID, we all just locked ourselves away. We all just became screen people and teams. And I try and sort of say, look, I know that you're going to click with this person. Might not be for now, but I guarantee, based on what you told me about what you're going to be looking for in your team in the next 6 months, this person's definitely worth having on your radar. And I've got some clients that will very much be open to that, but it comes with trust. It's down to relationships. They've got to value my opinion, and obviously, that can come with time.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going back to what you said there, where, if it's a senior sort of CMO, perhaps head of marketing, more senior role at the moment, that someone's puts an ad up for, they're probably going to get, you said, about 300 applicants, which is a huge number. And I think, there's so many challenges kind of inbuilt into that. Obviously, she said that the frustration of the person who's, applying for those and not really getting anywhere is one side of it. And I do also want to kind of talk about that side of it. But I think the other thing that sometimes people miss is how do you differentiate yourself in that scenario? Yes, you know you're great, and you've got this really solid experience, but what is it about your application, about how you're presenting your experience, if you're one of 299 applicants who perhaps 200 of them have got, give or take, very similar experience to you? How do you actually differentiate yourself? And I think that sometimes that piece can get missed even by the really senior candidates. They don't necessarily think about it in that way. Have you noticed that? Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and it's a really valid point about, how do you make yourself stand out in terms of, an application? And it's hard. It is difficult because I think when we talk about CVs and cover letters, there's so much out there, so many different opinions on this and different sources.
And a lot of them very contradictory as well, which just makes it a million times harder.
Completely. I've had CVs, obviously I get CVs every single day. And, I was chatting to someone actually recently the other day about this, because I was saying they had a CV and literally I'd say a third of their page was a photograph of their face. And then the rest of it was, a sort of experience and summary. And it was so short, they were just not selling themselves. And I did interview this person because I knew the brand that they worked at previously, which I knew was credible and a great brand. And I actually gave them that feedback and said, look, you're selling yourself short. So I certainly say, look, nowadays, my personal opinion on it, is very much a case where if you can stick to 2 pages, I don't personally believe there's anything wrong with 4 pages, but I wouldn't go further than 4 pages on a CV, my personal opinion. I think, especially more at the senior end, when let's be honest, these CMOs, GMs, etc., marketing directors, we've pretty much, these guys have pretty much done it all at some point. They're a bit of a sort of, what is it, jack of all trades, master of none, whereby, they do everything for cross strategy, the lot. But what they find difficult to really sort of pull and identify is what their 3 streams or 4 streams of expertise, so what their pillars of expertise really are. And I'll say, really harness and focus on that. So, I met with someone recently and we were talking about what they've done. And I was saying, for me, one of your streams is absolutely acquisition. So, go to market, acquisition, really being able to drive pure acquisition based campaigns to generate new customers. But when you're in those roles and you've been in those roles for so long, you feel like you're running at 5 million miles an hour. You're doing everything. You've got stakeholders galore coming out of your ears to deal with. You're in the trenches. And so it's really difficult to pull yourself out of that, zoom out and kind of go, right, well, what are my, 3 or 4 pillars of expertise really are? So I certainly say, look, start with that. Basically, keep it really simple if you can. You want a summary in there. You want your skills. You want your technical skills in there if it's relevant. Key responsibilities, bullet points, key achievements. That's really important, especially when you're dealing with a recruiter. I know that when I'm representing my candidates to, a client, they're straight away looking at what those key achievements are, because it's got to be relatable to what they're wanting to implement themselves. So, I always say, and it's incredible, I meet some really awesome people who they've just not interviewed in so long. They've been on the other side of the fence. And it's difficult, they've been the one holding the interviews, and now, they're completely on the other. And I think the other thing is to, once you've got to interview stage, is not to waffle. It's important just to be really articulate, be concise. We used to do back in the day, describe what a business plan is. And I used to have, marketing specialists that might be earning 70K base that would nail it. They could articulate it in under 2 minutes. And then I'd have, marketing directors or GMs who still at it 20 minutes later. But that's a really good sort of test as to just really being able to stick to exactly what the answer is going to be, and using things like the STAR technique as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And I think, as you said, I think there's so much kind of contradictory advice out there that it can be difficult for people to know. You'll read 5 things that say your CV cannot be longer than 1 page. And then you'll read 5 other things saying, if your CV is only 1 page, you're not communicating all of your value. So I understand why people are confused, because there is a lot of contradictory advice out there. But I think for me, like, so much of it comes down to, and you hit the nail on the head there, if you haven't looked for a role in a while, or you've been in roles, or you've been on the other side of the fence, you've been the one interviewing, you can be really good at what you do and not know how to sell yourself. They're actually 2 separate skills. And I think sometimes people feel a bit, the word, maybe even embarrassed to say, I actually don't really know how to do this. I haven't had to do this in a while, or particularly if they're quite senior. And so it's kind of saying to people that it's okay that you don't know. Like, it's not inbuilt in your job description that you know how to do this.
Absolutely.
And sorry, you go.
I was going to say, my advice to many, I guess, senior, candidates, certainly at the moment, are, if you're seeing, if you see an ad and it's, that perfect role, I'm certainly saying to a lot, look, if you can, understand perhaps who the hiring manager is, use your network. That's really important. Leverage on that. Do you know anyone that knows somebody in that business, or do you know yourself who that hiring manager is? If you've got a relationship or connection, I don't see there's anything wrong with connecting with them on LinkedIn as well. I'm finding that a lot of individuals at the senior level who are probably getting more joy, at least cutting into interviews and networking more so than the ones that are literally just submitting a CV. So you've got to be, there's another level to this now. You've got to have your game face on.
I completely agree. And it's one of the kind of core pieces of advice that I give to people that I'm working with, to actually have a strategy around that, and a strategy around how they network and know Where would you ideally like to see yourself in maybe a year or 2 years? What are those businesses? And actually start to kind of work towards now building networks and building essentially advocates within those businesses. That obviously takes effort and it takes a bit of time, which is not always easy when you're in the trenches and working hard in your current role. But it's one of those things that I think, your future self will thank you if you can find the time for it, because if the unfortunate happens and you are made redundant or of your own volition, you decide to make a move, if you've got years behind you of having done that, it will just make your life so much easier. Particularly, I agree with you, particularly at the more senior level, I think it makes such a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm finding as well that as much as the senior end is tough, and I say, when I talk senior, I'm talking more about, 180K base sort of plus mark. But there is still, certainly from what I'm finding my clients' perspective. So, those individuals that are hiring, there is still a real competition, sort of a demand to fight for the best talent in the market. And, it's interesting that when the sort of remit of, say, that 80K to sort of 120K base mark, what I call the really great doers, maybe hybrid sort of strategic thinking, but also able to execute, and really sort of manage campaigns and do the do. That those individuals are, they're still very much in demand. They really are. Like it's a case, and I'm saying, when I say demand, I'm talking more the data centric, capabilities. Interestingly, I had a really good conversation last week with a GM of marketing who was saying to me that, when we're in those COVID days, we also had the capacity, because we businesses were just seeing results fly through the roof. Like, it was an incredible time, certainly for e-commerce, as we know. But it was interesting to hear that, there was that opportunity there to probably think a bit more creatively and actually be able to go, well, actually, okay, we can push the boundaries here, and we've actually got a bit more budget here. So we'll do a test and learn there, and we'll try this, and we'll see what that does. Right now, there is so much pressure on marketers in general that creative thinking perhaps isn't as, it's more logical. It's like, look at the data, what's it doing? The affordability to take a risk now with some of these campaigns just isn't there. So, if you've got the ability to really be able to translate what the data is doing, communicate that effectively across all of your stakeholders to make it, commercially, it makes sense from a business perspective, you'll go far.
Yeah. It's a really,
yeah.
Yeah, it's a really key skill, isn't it? And it's something I've talked about before. It's that idea of marketing your marketing, because I think we're still in a world where a lot of businesses don't really understand marketing still. And if you're someone who can be that conduit, be that translator to say, this is actually what we're trying to do, and this is what that means, and these are the results, and as you said, this is the data that we're basing these decisions on, and this is what we're going to achieve. That skill, which is marketing your marketing kind of skill, is really, really key. If you can actually speak the language of the business and vice versa, I think it makes such a difference. And again, it's one of those things, going back to how you differentiate yourself on your CV. How do you articulate that? Like, how do you show that you're the person that can do that? Because I think that is a really key skill and something that not everyone is great at. So it's picking out those, like your example with the marketer who's done a lot of acquisition, picking out those things that actually you're great at, but perhaps some of your competitors for a role maybe wouldn't have done.
100%. I mean, I say to, these, we're talking again, like more the senior end, say to these individuals, when you're picking out those 4 streams, you're not allowed to say strategy, because they're all strategic.
Everyone says strategy.
Strategy. That's not part of the rules. So you got to dig a bit deeper. We can't talk about strategy. But yeah, I think very much the data centric stuff, I think, is really coming back. It's coming into play, and it's, nowadays, I think, there's not many, as I mentioned earlier, there's not many businesses that, I mean, there's some, of course, that are going to be open to creative thinking, but there's just a lot of pressure. I really feel for a lot at the moment, they're constantly being told, do more with less.
Yeah.
that common saying that we've been hearing probably for the last 12 months, banging the drum, keep doing more with less. It's tough. It really is. It's tough. And not many are going to be getting the bonus this year, unfortunately. And, I think there's a lot that if you're in a job, it's kind of like, right, well, do everything you can to kind of keep being in that role
Yeah.
right now in this volatile market, which
Yeah.
hopefully, who knows when it's going to start to filter off. But I think hopefully maybe in the new year or in the next 6 months, we'll start to hopefully see a change.
Do you see any difference between industries, or is it just pretty tough across the board?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question and a good one. I think, look, from my perspective, I'm finding that businesses like education, I'd say businesses like, your renewable energies, tech to a degree, I think tourism, they're to a degree growth industries where, there's still money that's being pumped into them. And they are 100%, they're busy, they're recruiting, they've got plans. Retail, as we know, is taking a really big hit, particularly. I think retail has been really, really tough. These sort of bigger, there's some, retailers that we know are just going to continue to fly because they're that big. They're just absolute machines and they're going to continue to do really well. Whereas I feel for those SMEs, those medium-sized businesses, the ones that are independently run, that have got fantastic products, fantastic services, they're doing it tough right now. They really are. And so as a consumer, I'll be honest, I'm more inclined to support those brands than they are, some of the sort of major retailers.
Yeah.
Which is their margins are probably a lot more minimal and they're going to be cheaper. If I can, I'll rather support an independent player, 100%.
Yeah. You see it, don't you? Even just I see it even just in like my Gmail inbox of, the EDMs coming in of, oh, we're on sale again, or special offer, or, buy this bundle of products. As a consumer, if you do have a little bit of money to spend, it's selfishly quite nice because there's lots of offers out there. But yeah, I always look at those things with the sort of marketing hat on, going, wow, they're obviously, times are tough. Like, they're obviously really, really struggling. I wouldn't.
See sales everywhere. Absolutely. I mean, there's been recruitment freezes and some occasions very much within the finance and banking sectors, but it's not all quite doom and gloom. I mean, those guys we know are going to make a lot of money and continue to do so. They're quite well positioned. But I don't believe at the moment, really, particularly any industry, super, 100% protected and safe. I think, we're all just, rolling up our sleeves, heads down, bum up, doing our best to make sure that, we're continuing to be profitable.
Yeah. Going back to that point on frustration, because it's an interesting one and it's a really important one. And as you said, and I agree too, that, really feel for people at the moment that are really out there in the trenches, looking, applying, doing all that they can, and just not getting cut through that perhaps they would have previously got. And I think that's one of the things I know from some of the conversations that I've been having, that people find really difficult, because there's that kind of voice in the head going, well, this hasn't happened to me before. When I was out there 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I was getting snapped up like this. You're like, what? And I think it's just human nature, isn't it? We all immediately go to that. It's me. What's wrong with me? What am I doing wrong?
Absolutely.
And it's really tough and a really hard place to be. What advice would you give to someone who is just doing it really tough at the moment, and on that wheel of just applying?
Absolutely. Firstly, it's not personal.
Yeah.
I think that's and I know it's
you.
it's not a personal thing. I think you really got to remember that. I've actually read a blog recently on my website about just the basic sort of mental principles and coping mechanisms to sort of focus on. That was on my website. But number one, I'll say, if you have been in that position where you have recently been made redundant, you do need to sort of just stop and take a couple of days to sort of almost emotionally connect with it and come to terms with it. You before sort of, hitting the right, I've got to get a job, apply, you've got to take, whether it be a week or a couple of days, just to actually pause, breathe, deal with it, embrace it, and then you're then going to position yourself mentally to go, right, okay, what's my plan of attack? And when we talk about plan of attack, I always say, put together a really, awesome, job tracker. You can build it really simply on, Excel. There's some really good job tracker programs that you can, install, etc. You can get apps nowadays. So definitely get one of those. Connect yourself with maybe 2 or 3 really good recruiters. So, recruiters that you trust, that you perhaps have got relationships with. And then, really start to work on your CV. So whatever's on that CV, I do think it needs to reflect on what's on LinkedIn as well. And maybe get some opinions, speak to a recruiter, speak to, colleagues or, people that, you trust again, mentors, get their advice, get their feedback. And then I almost say, my sort of a plan of attack, if I was looking, would be almost KPI yourself per week. So maybe you say, right, this week I'm going to make sure that I have at least 2 coffees a week, whether it be with previous managers, work colleagues, or recruiters, or even, I guess thought leaders in your industry that you've identified that you want to associate yourself with and connect with and learn from. Reach out to them on LinkedIn. I think if someone reached out to me and said, I really admire what you do, or blah, 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 or whatever it may be, and I'd love to connect with you because one day I'm wanting to, get to a point where I have my own, whatever it may be, I'd be really flattered. I'd be so flattered. And I think some of these other leaders should be as well. If you've got senior marketers or mid-level marketers that want to hopefully maybe one day become a CMO, I'd say to them, look, send an email on LinkedIn or connect, because it's just about, I think the more people hopefully the more it's going to, open up some inroads as well.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think it's so interesting because I'd give that advice to people as well, and I think it's the normal reaction is kind of a look of horror. and they sort of go, oh God, no, I don't want to do that. And I think maybe, we've become so desensitized to it because it's part of what we've done for so often, but it is a really scary thing for some people. It feels like a really scary thing for them to do, but you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there. And I say the exact same thing to them. If someone sent you that message, what would you think? Like, how would you respond? You'd be flattered. And the worst case scenario, in my experience, is that the person won't respond. It is actually the worst thing. But in your mind, I think we all go to that place where, oh my God, they're going to write this horrible, I'm going to get this really rude response, or God forbid, they might actually screenshot it and make a post about it. And I become that pest person that people are talking about on LinkedIn. And that's not going to happen. If you've written a polite, respectful message, that's not going to happen. The worst case scenario is probably that they won't respond. And the more likely scenario is that they're going to be really flattered and touched and come back and say, oh, thank you, that's lovely. I'd love to have a coffee, or maybe just, jump on a Zoom or whatever it might